Hello, hello. Welcome to King's Inner Court. I am one of your hosts for today, Jeremiah.
I'm Best.
And today we have a pretty interesting topic. Bess will introduce us to that. But first, before we get into the topic of today, just to give you guys a little synopsis of what we are about and what this podcast is about. So I almost gave up the topic. So this podcast is really just to give you a brief summary. How can men be better men? We draw inspiration of great men of old, referring specifically more to the great men of the Bible. Obviously, there are no perfect men except for Christ, but we draw inspiration and qualities from these great men and try to apply in our own lives, as well as discussing modern day topics. So you'll hear some friendly debates, we'll probably agree on some things as well, but this is more so to explore different topics, and hopefully you guys also draw the same inspiration as we do. So yeah, Best, what's the topic for today?
So it's a juicy topic. We're gonna be talking about masculinity versus toxic masculinity.
Yes,
I know
sir.
we started off the podcast our last episode talking about masculinity, but we know there's this topic going around that's becoming more mainstream, known as toxic masculinity. Something that's been getting more mainstream in the past decade, I would say. The idea of toxic masculinity, and there's a lot of definitions that come up. Toxic masculinity. What is it? How does it affect the people around? How does it affect the women? And we're here to actually discuss that. What is masculinity, and how does that differ from toxic masculinity? Does toxic masculinity actually exist? Is there such thing as toxic masculinity? We're going to get into that today. So, you're right. I was just curious to ask you, what, in your opinion, what is masculinity versus what people perceive as toxic masculinity? What is masculinity versus toxic, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, for me to tackle masculinity, it'll be pretty lengthy. But for now, I think cover the toxic masculinity. So I think, at least the way I perceive it, you can break it down in two ways. But first and foremost, I think a lot of people honestly have their own definition of toxic masculinity. A lot of it is based on experiences. At least that's what I find when interacting with people or just watching people talk about it on the internet, looking into it online as well. But I see toxic masculinity in like two ways. There is the traditional toxic masculinity, which some of it is just to me not toxic, and I'll cover that soon. And then there's also the modern day toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
So let's go into traditional toxic masculinity, right? There is the ultimate provider, and there's levels to it. Like, being a provider is masculine, but then when all you think about is only how I can provide and nothing else, then I believe that you're stepping into the realm of toxic masculinity. Because when you provide for your family, there is more than just provision. There's also spending time with your family. There's also being there for your family, being intentional about your wife and your kids, or if you don't have kids yet, be intentional about your wife. So there's quality time. So traditional toxic masculinity, like I said, there's the ultimate provider, when all you care about is bringing money back. Of course, there are caveats and situations that, make sense, but that is one aspect of it. Another aspect of traditional toxic masculinity is the default aggressor. Like, you gotta be him all the time. You gotta be aggressive all the time. You gotta be violent all the time. Yes, there was a time that it quote unquote called for that back in the warring ages, but we're not in the warring ages. We're in the new age. We're in the AI age. All jokes aside, there is the default aggressor. That's someone who you have to come off as like, oh, yo, if you mess with me, I can hurt you, I can harm you, X, Y, and Z, so forth and so on. That is, in my opinion, toxic masculinity. Another aspect of traditional toxic masculinity, in my opinion, is someone who, and by the way, some of these are also transferable to modern day masculinity, but I do find there are some modern day masculinity aspects that don't necessarily fully apply to the traditional ones.
Yeah.
There's also, let's talk about the traditional roles, right? There is, you hear this all the time, right, Bess, of like, oh, the man brings the money home and then the woman takes care of the home. Like she's, takes care of the home, stay at home mom. And you will hear some people when referring to these roles as toxic. But let's really break down where this like stemmed from. By the way, I'm not a scientist, nor do I have all the statistics in my mind. These are my opinions, so take them with a grain of salt. But because prior to what has been going on, and you can see my, anyways, prior to what has been going on, because of how the economy is set up, the man can go out to work, and then because there are usually kids at home, the mother would take care of the kids. So that is kind of like the traditional roles that people speak about. Obviously, there are more details to that, but if you hear that nowadays, where like a man wants maybe a stay-at-home mom, you hear some people being like, or stay-at-home wife or mom, yeah. You hear some people saying like, oh, that's toxic. You don't want your wife to make money, or you don't want your wife to make more money than you. It's not about that. And I speak specifically about like when there's children involved. When there's no children involved, then like, whatever it is whatever it is. But when there's children involved, it is very crucial and important that children have both figures, mother and father, but one of them got to make money, right? And traditionally speaking, it has been the man. Also, mothers are inherently better at nurturing. They have more nurturing characteristics.
Yeah.
So it just makes more sense for the mother to take care of the children. Now, no one is, or at least we're not, belittling the role of a mother. The role of a mother is crucial, is very, very crucial. In fact, you need both roles at home to have a proper, safe home. Obviously, there are caveats to it. But when you have both roles at home, it usually makes for a better home, so to speak. Obviously, there are situations and outliers in that. So going back to the traditional masculinity, these are just some aspects. Now you have some modern day toxic masculinity. For example, I'm going to talk about the control aspect. It's funny because you'll see or you hear in relationships where, let's say, and by the way, it goes both ways. I'm just using an example here, but you hear in some relationships of like, oh, this guy doesn't want their girl dressing in a certain way. They're controlling. Let me go to what God says about it, and I'm going to use the word of God, right? So originally, relationship was the prerequisite for marriage, right? Yeah. So you're working towards a goal that is marriage. So when you are, and obviously society and history has like manipulated that and twisted that, but anyways, I'm speaking in the context of a relationship that God has approved. So when you're in so-called relationship, you're working towards said marriage. In this marriage, you're not two individuals, but you're now one. So you're one team and you work towards a common goal, or you work towards each other in this relationship. So because in this dating, prerequisite to marriage, you're practicing these things before entering that marriage stage. So now that you're one, technically, or practicing and getting ready to be joined as one, the man represents the woman. The woman represents the man. If the man is saying, hey, I don't necessarily like what you're wearing, it's not because he's trying to be controlling. It's because when people look at the woman, they also look at the man. It's a joined image, and also vice versa. If a man is on Instagram, thirsting around, the man is also an image of his girl. So it definitely goes both ways. I know there's some people that are like, but men say this a lot. Hey, women say a lot of things too. It goes both ways. Faults on both sides. But anyways, not that I want to necessarily speak about the faults. Is just more so of toxic masculinity. So these are some aspects that I've noticed. There are a lot more that I could speak on, but I'd like to hear your thoughts as well. Best.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I really like the point you made, particularly with like how your woman is a reflection of you. Because if you go back even to scriptures where it says that when we become married, when we get married, right, you become one flesh, right? You become one flesh, you know. And I think, and to answer your question, like, what is toxic masculinity? I think toxic masculinity, in my opinion, is extremes. It's about extremes. They kind of basically take inherently qualities that are generally associated with men that help men to survive and protect and take to the extreme. So for example, I'll look at like competitiveness, right? I think it's important for men to have a healthy dose of competitiveness and aggression, right? Because that's needed to protect their loved one, protect their family, protect from potential intruders, right? But it becomes a problem when it's taken to the extreme where now you're hurting people, your loved ones, right? Or people or the vulnerable, right? I'm curious now, when we look at toxic masculinity, I think we always look at toxic masculinity in terms of that side. And that is also a very huge component, right? Where it's like it's taken to that to extreme where guys who are too overly aggressive, overly competitive to the point they're harming those around them, right? They're quote unquote toxic, right? They're toxic to people around them, harming those around them. I'm wondering, is there another side of toxic masculinity where guys who are overly passive in the point where they're basically it's harmful to be weak, basically, right? Because especially as men, we're called to lead, we're called to protect, we're called to provide, right? And it's a harm to society where you choose to be. And obviously, like there's gonna be times when we might be going through something, and I don't even mean it in terms of that, right? But I think there's another side of it where men who are in the far side where it's overly passive or weak, and that can be another side of it where I think a lot of people don't talk about. I think also we talk about the other extreme, right? And neither are good, right? Neither are good, right? But I think when it comes to toxic masculinity, it takes those inherently masculine qualities and and use those rather to protect their loved ones and themselves and their loved ones, but use that to harm those around them, right?
Yeah.
And I think the answer, and just going back to what you mentioned, like I found that interesting, where it's like you spoke about just with, for example, saying like discussing certain things with your woman, right? Whether it's, for example, hey, I don't want you dressing like that, right? Yeah, I think people, that's a very interesting one. I think ultimately, I think I would argue where it comes from, but I think at the same time, we have to also understand the difference between controlling and boundaries,
Yeah.
right? Because I think a lot of times people mistake boundaries as controlling, right? And I think how I kind of perceive it is that now if you're kind of threatening them to do this, and if you don't do it, I'm going to do this, then yes, you're leaning more towards the controlling side of things. That's when you kind of lean more towards toxic masculinity. But if you're communicating, hey, I would appreciate if you don't do this or you don't do this, it's less of a place of control and trying to restrain and dictate your decisions, but more so from a place of you communicating authentically your needs and wants and desires. right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a key difference. I think a lot of times people mistake that as being controlled, right? And I think the key difference is one is you're trying to control her decisions, and you're emotionally attached to the outcome, to the decision that she does, versus you not necessarily being emotionally attached to her decision and the outcome, but you're communicating your needs and wants and desires,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that's the difference, right? One comes from a more a fearful, anxious place, and the other comes from a more grounded place,
Yeah.
right? That's something I'm learning a lot. I'm still learning. I'm learning a lot about. Like I'll be honest, I'm not perfect at that. I'll be honest, but I think it comes down to communicating from a place of anxiousness and communicate from a place of groundedness,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think the first is controlling is based on anxiousness and fear and doubt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus the other where you're communicating, it comes from a place of abundance and it comes from a place of being grounded. Like
Yeah.
grounded your masculinity, grounded who you are as a man, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you make some good points there about like where it comes from. Like, I guess how I see toxic masculinity is really, like
Yeah.
you said, it's extremes and it's really insecurity. Now, don't
Yes.
get me wrong, everyone has insecurities, right? But it's important to address these insecurities. But that might be a topic for another day.
Yes.
But just to really talk about like toxic masculinity and even just the
Yeah.
examples that you gave best. I there is a big difference between being responsible to each other and
Mhm.
needing to be in control of everything. Like knowing where your partner is. There's a difference between like, hey, like let me know if you're going out to. Let me know if you're going out because I want to make sure that you're safe. Or I just want to be aware that this is where you're going. And to be honest, you wouldn't. In my opinion, you shouldn't even have to say that. I feel
Yeah.
like it's the whoever is going now, wherever the case is, their responsibility to be like, hey, by the way, I'm going to this place.
Yeah.
Not only
Yeah.
you communicating and being clear, you're being responsible to your partner. Now, it's a whole different story if it's like, oh, I want to go out to this place, or you can't go there, or I'm going out to this place. Oh, if you're gonna go out to this place, make sure you text me every 2 seconds. And like, I'm using extremes here, but that's really what toxic masculinity is just extremes. Some other examples is even the emotion aspects, like suppressing emotions. I know that's one example of modern and traditional toxic masculinity, where it's like, and maybe even more so traditional, but it's more so of like you gotta suppress your emotions. You can't cry at all. You have to be a brick wall in everything that you do. But in all of this, there's balance. We will talk about masculinity and how we perceive it soon, but in toxic masculinity, if you're one who can't express yourself or know how to express yourself, and it's a journey to learn how to express yourself. I'm not going to pretend or sit here like I'm a master at it. It's something that I have to practice every day, be intentional about every day as well. And even like I have a men's group that I'm in, I'm even learning how to be more intentional about expressing my thoughts or expressing what I'm going through. If you were to approach me, if you were to approach me maybe like a couple months ago,
Yeah.
bro, I'm a bottle. Like you're not hearing nothing from me. But I say all that to say that like the suppression of emotions, I would consider as toxic, not only to yourself but also to those around you. The reason why it's toxic to yourself is because no person, man or woman, should bottle everything up. It's not healthy. It's not healthy. You start clouding yourself. You start inviting thoughts that are detrimental.
Yeah.
And it's also harmful to other people because one day you're going to blow up. One day that bottle is going to open. And you might say things that you're going to regret or do things that you're going to regret. Either way, it's not healthy. There's also other aspects of toxic masculinity, like even the terminology masculine versus feminine. Me personally, I do agree that there are masculine things and then there are feminine things. But people have misconstrued, I think I said that right, the terminology so much because
Yeah.
I know I spoke about the traditional roles, right? Where the man will go get the money. And today's society, like, anyways, I'll talk about that a little bit later. But, the man will go get the money, the woman or the mother will be at home taking care of the children, cooking, cleaning, whatever the case is. Some people will take, as an example, cooking and cleaning and be like, that's a feminine role. Who said trying to be clean and feeding yourself is feminine? In my opinion, it's not feminine. I clean my house basically almost every weekend. I cook every weekend. I gotta survive. Like, I'm not gonna be in a dirty place. So if that is feminine, that I just don't understand where that comes from. But anyways, the point I'm trying to make concerning that is people let me not even say people. Let me not even say people. It's just more so of terminologies have been twisted, manipulated, usually for worse. But I believe we should be more careful about how things are said or how we say certain things. Specifically, I'm just using the example like I used previously in like cooking and cleaning. That's something that you should be doing as a person. Yeah. If you're a responsible person to yourself and to those around you and to society, you should be cooking and cleaning. Let's talk about cleaning. What's inside the home and what's inside of you is reflected outwards. That's my own opinion. If you have a dirty home all the time, there's usually something going on internally. And I don't say that in like a bad way. Like, I actually do mean that like your state of mind is probably not organized. I'm not saying you have to be clean 24/7, but there is responsibility to your home and to yourself. There's the cooking aspects. Like, you don't have to be a chef. You don't have to be the greatest cook. If you want to buy, food all the time, like, to each their own. I'm not gonna shame you for that. To each their own. But it is important that you learn how to take care of yourself. So those are just some people would categorize that as like feminine roles, but those are just responsibilities. Now there's some masculine roles, quote unquote, like for example being the breadwinner, so to speak. I do think there's extremities, and I do think that as a man, it is my responsibility to provide for my family. So that is what I would, or I guess that is one of the aspects, or those are one of the aspects that I would say that men should be responsible about. But it doesn't mean that a wife can't work. Like, that's not a masculine thing because she desires to work. If I want to use the example of Proverbs 31 from the Bible, it talks about how the wife at home, by the way, is looking at for example, looking at like real estate, looking at businesses, actually being proactive in the home and also being proactive outside the home. So this stereotype that like women should not work at all, or I guess wives should not work at all, like that is maybe toxic femininity. I don't know if that's a term, but so that's just me kind of going on. But I would like to hear some of your thoughts as well, or more about this.
Yeah, that's a good point. I find that interesting, the idea of toxic femininity. But we'll get to that one.
Yeah.
But I think that's a very it's a very interesting point, and I think I like what you said, where it's like I think a lot of it is cultural.
Yeah.
Right, a lot of it is cultural because there was a time when it's like, as a man, you got to be the breadwinner, you got to be making the money, you got to be making the bread, bringing the bread, But nowadays it's like oftentimes women are bringing just as much, if not more. Right, and I think that's been a lot of the time. That's been a bit of a discussion where it's like now, like, are men feeling it's difficult to provide for women? Mm-hmm. Even that, like now, like women are making money and making money and being billed and things of that nature. Right, mm-hmm. Whereas there's a time where it's like, like these things are very gender specific. Right, where it's like going out and bringing money doing like the handiwork and stuff like that. Women to come to clean, to cook, to do all these things, right? I think a lot of these things are, for lack of a better term, man-made or societal, but there's something more spiritual, right? There's more like I do agree that yes, the man is called to lead, but there's something more spiritual that goes beyond like a lot of these gender roles, right? Because I think even though yes, even if a woman does make more than her husband, right, the man can still lead in other ways. The man still even if the man still lead, the man still called to lead even regardless of they don't make as much money as his wife,
Mm.
right? And I think the aspect of toxic masculinity, right, when we look deep within toxic masculinity, it really kind of, in addition to taking those qualities and just kind of making it extreme, right, there's also an aspect where it's like, it's very narrow.
Do you want to elaborate more on that?
Yeah, like when I say that, it's like the idea is like masculinity is only one aspect,
Mm.
right, of just providing or fighting or aggression,
Yeah.
right? And I do agree there is a healthy dose of aggression that I think men should have, right?
Hmm.
But I think it looks at that one aspect of it, where there's so many aspects, and I think it looks at one aspect that makes men more one-dimensional, whereas God has called men to do so many things, to take so many forms at different times, right? To
Yeah.
be, and that in of itself helps men to not only be better leaders for themselves, like for their communities and their families, even for themselves as well,
Yeah.
right? For themselves as well. And I think one example is like it's something even as simple as like, I know we spoke about this, like working, right? We're always grinding, we're always hustling, right? And I think this perception of as a man, and then obviously you have to work hard. I'm saying don't work hard, put in the
Definitely.
work, put in the effort, but also we gotta take the time for rest,
Yeah.
right? I think I look back at even the scripture where God said on the seventh day, God rested, right?
Hmm.
And if God Himself will rest, who are we to say we're to keep grinding and hustling? No rest, right? It's not biblical, right? So I think it's important to kind of be aware of that, right? Now I'm very curious though. We talk a lot about toxic masculinity. What is there a thing called toxic femininity?
That's a good question. To be very honest, up until I recently said it, I don't think I've ever heard that in my life. Or if I
Yeah,
have, it's
yeah,
in the deepest parts of my mind.
yeah. Because I've wondered that too. Like, can there be? We talk a lot about toxic masculinity, how harmful that is. But what can toxic femininity, right?
Yeah.
What? Because I always find that interesting when we talk a lot about toxic masculinity.
We do, yeah.
Yeah, like okay, there is like I get where people like I get the premise of it, but I think although there's one side of me where when there's yeah okay there is this toxic the aspects of men that can be very toxic and dangerous, but I think there's another side of me where kind of questions what's the motive behind this becoming so mainstream, right?
Yeah.
Is it more so to bring more awareness, or is this more so an agenda? And I don't want to get too conspiracy theorist, but is it more so because let's call spade a spade? There has been a huge attack on men,
Yeah.
right? And I think a lot of this, oftentimes, it seems sometimes where it's more of like an agenda, for lack of a better term, to attack men,
To shame men, yeah.
hate
Attack
men,
men,
because
yeah.
I think, and this goes back to what we were talking about a little bit, where it's like everything, just a man being a capable man, assertive, is deemed as toxic,
Mm-hmm.
right? And yes, there are some things that can be toxic, right? But I think we should be careful kind of attaching that to men,
Yeah.
right? Being masculine, right? Because yes, it is healthy. It is healthy. It's okay for men to be masculine, right? To be men, right? Because it's needed, right? It's needed in society. It's needed to society to grow, right? And honestly, I'm not to downplay like the work that women do, right? But it's so important to look at what men like, to look at the benefits of a lot of these quote unquote toxic traits, right? How it's helped our society, how it's helped our society to grow, the advancement, the development, right? Competitiveness. Competitiveness allows the growth of society and growth of the market, growth of businesses, and obviously I'm not saying women can't have that as well, right? It's for everyone, but I think we often attach these to men, and now we're kind of deeming it as toxic.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's one thing I do want to be careful with, because oftentimes we kind of talk about toxic masculinity, but it's I always wonder what's the motive behind it. Or because I think when we throw these terms around, it seems like we're kind of anything that is deemed as masculine, right, or dominant or assertive or firm is automatically deemed as quote toxic. As a result, some men could kind of go to the far extreme, which I would also argue is toxic masculinity, which is weak, is passive, right? And that's another form of toxic masculinity that oftentimes we don't like talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, like you make a lot of good points there. Yeah, even like the whole, I guess, I'm gonna use the word agenda here, but like from what I've seen, and obviously like everyone has their own opinions and all that, but from what I've seen, the word like there is toxic masculinity, there is toxic femininity. I don't know what that looks like just yet, but I guess right now I haven't formulated an opinion on that, so I won't speak too much on that. But I have seen that the toxic masculinity movement, I will call it, is used a lot of times, like as you said best, is like to shame men for being a man. Of course, there are valid examples and valid cases when a man is being toxic, but wanting like, I remember one time, I'm gonna use some examples here. I remember one time, I think I opened the door for a lady, and like someone commented like that was toxic because she can open the door for herself. And I'm like, yeah, I know she can, but being a gentleman or being someone who's kind is not toxic masculinity. Or even, for example, like I remember I was having a conversation with some friends of mine, which are women, and at times I'll be like, oh yeah, like males do this, females do this, and they're like, oh, don't use the word females, that's toxic. And it's like, but y'all are females though. And I know there might be some people that are like, don't use that term, but like it's not a derogatory term. Unless you want it to be, but I don't see it as a derogatory term. But yeah, no, I do see the movement as shaming men a lot of times for just wanting or trying to be a man. And it has created a lot of passive men, some by choice and just some because if they speak out, oh man, all the fingers will point at them. Or if they want to be assertive in a healthy way, in a way that they believe and is standing firm upon in a healthy way, it's like, oh, why are you doing this? Why are you acting like this? And then they just want to reel back. There has been a major push on that from what I've perceived anyways, especially in the last couple of years. It has kind of slowed down, I think, maybe in the last year with like men's mental health. But even the whole men's mental health movement, it's good. The idea is good, but I do find that some people use that to try to quote unquote create passive men as well. But like that's probably a separate topic. But I guess my final toxic masculinity trait that I want to also speak about, which I think is also very important, is the sexual conquest. Where men feel like they're more masculine or more of a man if they sleep around with a lot of women. First of all, hurting other people is not masculine.
Yeah.
Um, trying to get as many bodies as you can is not masculine. It's insecurity. Not only are you doing damage to yourself, but you're doing damage to everyone else that you're sleeping around with. These are human beings at the end of the day, and I must say, like, generally speaking, men don't really do a good job of shutting down the praise of sleeping around. Like, if a man is like, oh yeah, I slept around with so and so women or this amount of women, more times than not, generally speaking, this does not apply to every case, this does not apply to every man's group, but just generally speaking, you'll see that being praised, like, oh, you're a gangster, a playboy, or you know how to work your way around women. But women are also human beings, men are also human beings, and if you're sleeping around and doing all these things, you're really just hurting other people. And masculinity, which we will be talking about very soon, does not support that idea. So that's really all from me in terms of toxic masculinity. I do feel like it's thrown around, the word and terminology is thrown around very easily. And I personally believe that, I'm not gonna say agenda, but there are people that want to use that to shame men or to like diminish men's voices.
Yeah.
That's my own opinion. But I guess before we cover what we believe masculinity looks like, do you have any final comments on that, Bess?
Yeah, I think that I really like what you mentioned about the aspect of the sexual conquest. I think a lot of that is also rooted in just the biggest, like I would argue, is the biggest enemy for men, for most men, is lust, right? And it's like, I think it's less of I think we kind of try to paint it as sexual conquest in a way to feed our ego,
Mm-hmm.
where underneath that is a lust issue. Underneath that is a lack of discipline,
Yeah.
sexual discipline, right? Because if men, I saw a quote on, I think it was Instagram or Threads or Twitter or something like that, where basically you were talking about if men can master their sexual urges, they can conquer it. They can conquer basically anything.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes your true real discipline, the true real discipline starts with that, right? That's like the main thing, because that's the one thing. You look at the Bible, right? Look at King David, look at Solomon, right? Even Samson, right? Like how much that has prevented guys from fulfilling their purpose,
Mm-hmm.
or hurt or kind of slow them down in their purpose, right? I think that's such a big component with the idea of toxic masculinity that is often not talked about. Was often not talked about, but no, I agree. I think while yes, there are these qualities that we want to be mindful of and the big awareness to, but I think at the same time we have to also be able to recognize the positives of these qualities, like the qualities, so long you want to take it to the extreme,
Yeah.
right? Healthy competitiveness, right? Healthy dose of aggression, and not to attack other people, more so to protect their loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
Right? To actually get that we are physically stronger, so we're physically stronger, not to hurt people, not to hurt, but to protect,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's why God created the woman as to help me, right? To help the further to reach that potential. Not to say that a man can't without a woman, but I think it's also just finding that right woman, right, who can help reach that faster, God willing,
Mm-hmm.
right? But no, that's basically where that's basically what I believe. I know you mentioned you want to talk about like, what is masculinity in contrast to toxic masculinity. So I know you were mentioning that.
Yeah, I mean, even before we get to that, like realistically speaking, for our viewers, like there is so much that we could talk about
Yeah.
concerning toxic masculinity that we might have left out or just didn't bring up. This can be an ongoing conversation. Um, But just we just wanted to share our general thoughts on toxic masculinity, what that looks like, some examples, what has been said. But yeah, to answer your question best, like, yeah, how I view masculinity. I mean, I have one example, and it's the best example, and that's Jesus
Yeah.
Christ.
Yeah. Sorry.
He displayed the ultimate form of masculinity, and I bet you. Okay, let me not say I bet you, but there definitely will be people who will look at some of the attributes of Jesus Christ and be like, "Oh, that's toxic." That's toxic masculinity. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about
Yeah.
masculinity, right? So this is a whole deep conversation as well, but let me just get started. So I think, or not I think, but one aspect of masculinity, like let's call it healthy masculinity, right, is self-control. You
Yeah.
brought up the lust thing. There's lust, there's aggression, there's even like self-regulating as well. Self-control is a healthy masculine trait. Obviously women should also have self-control, but we're just talking about in that aspect of men being seen as default overly aggressive.
Yeah.
Or even in the lust department, that's something that a lot of men do struggle with.
Yes.
So self-control is one aspect. Jesus Christ talks a lot about self-control. There's even a proverb in the book of Proverbs that talks about how the man who has self-control. I'm paraphrasing here, by the way, but the man who has self-control is greater than the man who has conquered a city. So even though in the latter, the man went out and conquered a city, displayed his prowess, displayed his strength. Someone who has actually mastered or who actually practices self-control in the eyes of God, I'm paraphrasing here, is greater than the latter. Another aspect of healthy masculinity is, we talked about suppressing emotions, is balancing the expression of emotion. Obviously, it doesn't mean just outpouring without any kind of boundaries, but knowing when to express and how to express. Obviously, for me personally, like I said earlier, it's a work in progress. I have gone a long way, a very long way from a couple of years ago or even last year. But knowing, I'm just gonna say my opinion here, but number one, identify people who you can express yourself to.
Yes.
Not everyone you should express yourself to.
Right.
Not everyone. I'm gonna be real. Not everyone wants the best for you. Some people might be your friends, but they may not want the best for you.
Yeah.
Some people might be your friends, but they may not want you to grow or to outgrow them. So learning how to express yourself to the right people is key. Number two, I said identify. Number two is, just learning how to express yourself. So confiding in people, telling people how you feel in a healthy manner. And it's practice, by the way. It's not something that you will understand overnight or know right away overnight. It's something that you gotta practice. There have been moments when I would express something to a friend that I can confide in, by the way, but sometimes it was a little too much, or sometimes it wasn't enough. So it's practice, something that you gotta get used to. There are other aspects, but like before I jump into other aspects, I would like to hear some of your thoughts as well, Bess. What are some either aspects that I spoke about or some aspects that are on your heart that you want to discuss about healthy masculinity?
Yeah. I think a big part of healthy, and I think again, like everything you said is 100%, right. Like everything you mentioned is right on. I think in addition, the one thing I'll say about healthy masculinity is initiative and leadership, right? Because I think going back to the scriptures, God called men to lead, right? God called men to lead. And not to say women can't be leaders, right? I know I probably was saying that women definitely can be leaders, right? And there's no women who are great leaders, right? But I think ultimately, especially within the family, God's called us to do that. And what's interesting is that the enemy knows that. That's why an enemy is attacking men, right? Because not only do I believe men are the foundation of the family, men are the foundation of a healthy society, right? That
Mm-hmm.
ultimately starts in the man. And if you even go back to the scripture, sin came to the world not after tempting Eve, after being tempted Adam,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's when sin came to the world, right? And it created division within the family and ultimately in society,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think a key factor as men is to be leaders, is to take back our leadership and our initiative, right? Because if we don't, then the government's going to be playing the role of the father in our households, right?
Yeah.
And see how that's been turning out, right? So I think a big part of it is initiative. A big part of that is leadership. But I would also say a big part of it is even just love, right? I look at I know you mentioned the greatest example is Christ, right? Where the Bible always says that husband, love your wives as Christ loved the church, right? A part of being a man, right, and then leadership, we should be looking at Christ, right? Christ is what we should be looking at, not Andrew Tate, not any of these other podcasts that try to bring different TikTokers and saying, oh, women are this and that, and any of that, right? It's Christ, right? And Christ basically laid down the blueprint. I was talking to a friend actually yesterday, Bible study I went to yesterday, and we were talking about how can we basically find our purpose, right? And the best way to find the only way we can find our purpose is looking at the manufacturer and looking at the owner's manual.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I think as men, like for us to really know what the purpose of men and what God's calling us as men, is looking at the owner's manual, looking at how Christ led a disciple, looking at how Christ leads us, looking at how Christ loved us.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that love story, the greatest love story is Christ in the church. Right, that's the greatest love story.
Mm-hmm.
And what better way to learn how to love our wives and learn how to love others is looking at the example of Christ laid out for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I actually want to bounce off some of the thoughts or some of the things that you mentioned there, like leadership, for example. Yeah, that's definitely one aspect that I do agree on as well, where healthy masculinity is a man being a leader, and I don't necessarily mean aspiring for a leadership role, so to speak. And I don't necessarily mean like trying to, because a lot of times I feel like a lot of people view leaders as kind of like bosses, where bosses say, hey, do this, do this, do that, do this. But a leader is someone who goes by example, who shows that, who is that example, leads by example. And Christ, like we mentioned, is that perfect person who led by example. He literally washed his disciples' feet, and he said, go and do the same for others. So a leader, in my opinion, is a servant, someone who is willing to serve others. So a healthy masculine man is someone who is willing to serve others. That's what it really means to be a leader, in my opinion. There's also that you mentioned best. I'm drawing a blank here, but yeah, just in the realm of leadership, not trying to step into that leadership role, but rather wanting to serve others. There was something else that I'm drawing a blank on that you said. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is, right, I remember the point. Right, so what I wanted to say is, Christ said, women respect your husbands, and then men love your wives, in an aspect of loving your wife. And then they make there's symbolism there where, like I said, the man is leading the wife, in this relationship, in this family, so to speak. And then Christ is leading the church because Christ is the groom, the church is the bride. And in the case of men and women, man is the groom or husband, and then the wife is the bride or wife. And it speaks about sacrifice. So now I want to talk about sacrifice. You know, healthy masculinity is sacrifice. It's not easy. Obviously, it's not easy to be a woman. I'm not saying it is, but it's not easy to be a man because being a man requires sacrifice. Not only are you like, if it comes down to it, men will, according to the example of Christ, men would lay down their lives for their wives, right? So that's not easy. Like, it's not easy to lay down your life for someone else, but Christ did that. And he did that for all of us. So I say all that to say that, like, another aspect of healthy masculinity alongside leadership, as best mentioned, is love. And love is action. It's not just a feeling. We can talk about that a little bit later and relationships more in depth later in a different session. But these are some aspects that I view as healthy masculinity. Some other aspects is being kind. There is a difference between, I think I might have mentioned this in the last session too, but there is a difference between kindness and niceness. You can be, there's inherently nothing wrong with being nice, but usually being nice invites people stepping on boundaries. Being kind is different, where you can express kindness but you know your boundaries. So being kind is one, being meek is one, but also knowing when to take up arms, so to speak. There's a phrase, you know, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than to be a gardener at war. So even in the aspect of the default aggression that we were speaking on, it is healthy and important, in my opinion, for men to not necessarily be aggressive, not be violent, but more so be strong, know how to fight for your loved ones, know how to, and fighting does not necessarily always mean like physical fighting, you know. It can be fighting for a cause. In fact, even an aspect of healthy masculinity, in my opinion, is someone who seeks justice for people. It doesn't necessarily have to mean entering the justice system or I guess those activities. It could be when you see something wrong, you stand up for it. Another aspect, even speaking concerning or on the topic of speaking up for something, God calls men to be strong and courageous. Strength can mean so many different things. It's like physical strength, yes, is good. You know, keep your temple, your body healthy and active. It can mean emotional strength, so regulating your emotions properly. It could mean mental strength, which in my opinion requires a lot of going to God for, because you know this life is not easy. There's a lot that happens and you need a strong foundation, and my best foundation is God. And we work towards that mental fortitude or that strength. There's also being strong in character, that God calls us to be. So like I said, standing up for the right things, speaking out for the right things, being courageous, knowing when to speak. I know there's some certain movements or certain things that happen that is like, oh, men shouldn't speak on this because it's not concerning a man. But at the end of the day, men don't live alone. Women don't live alone. The purpose of men and women is to be brought together and to serve God, to be united as one at the end of the day. So men should speak up and women should also speak up, because it affects both of them at the end of the day. We don't live in an isolated world where men live in one half of the world and women live in the other half of the world. If that was the case, I mean, I wouldn't want to know how that would turn out. So yeah, there's just so many aspects: kindness, love, respect, being strong and courageous, seeking out justice, being faithful is another aspect of healthy masculinity. So even in the context of a relationship, not even marriage yet, if you're, so I'm gonna say it right now, this is my opinion. um Relationship, quote unquote, is not necessarily biblical. Now, I'm not diminishing it, I'm not shaming it. You can
Yeah.
enter a relationship. I'm not speaking bad against it in any way, shape, or form. The point I'm trying to make here is that the original goal was courtship, where you get to know said woman and then you join together in the under the eyes, the guidance of God. But if you're gonna be in a relationship, which I'm not like saying is bad, be faithful as well. Like, men, be faithful as well. That's what it means to step into masculinity, so to speak. So I mean, there's so many different things, so many different aspects and characteristics that we can draw from Christ. So many characteristics we can draw from men who were great men as well, that also reflects Christ. In all honesty, we could talk about this all day, but we don't have all day, unfortunately. So, yeah, Best, anything that you would like to add on to that?
No, that you brought up some really, really, really good points, and I think the key thing we have to always remember is that,
And I think this is kind of the issue I find with society today,
where it's like there's a lot of focus on
this gender war, right? Where it's like man versus woman, woman versus man, right? Where it's like, in actuality, both have their own strengths and are meant to complement one another for the betterment of society. The problem is that where we have these two extremes that are fighting against each other, and in actuality, we think that it's okay. It's helping us prove ourselves, right? And to a degree, like in some instances, it was needed. Like obviously, like some cases, like for example, in time, the countries where women are put down by men and things of that nature, right? But I think, and I'm speaking more so in the context of the West, right? The West, I'll say, remembering that we're created together and we are one, right? And I think when we go with that mindset, it helps to it just puts it in a different perspective that it's not the one versus the other. It's us versus this common issue, right? This common issue that is hurting, that's creating division into the family and in society. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
No, it's a good point. That's a good point. That's a good point. I guess one question I'm curious is, what can we do as men to what action steps could we as men take to essentially yes, and I guess regarding this, like in the context of everything we spoke about, what action do we think we as men can take, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think you brought up a very beautiful point in where it is not man versus woman or women versus man, and that's how, at least in the Western world, it's really portrayed as, man versus women, women versus man. But really, we should be fighting towards something together. So I think to answer your question, to answer your question, it looks like many things, but the immediate things that come to mind is intentionality and cooperation. I believe because men now, like, I'm not saying that women cannot be leaders. I'm not saying that at all. There have been leaders in the Bible that are women. But because God called men to be leaders naturally, or I guess that's their divine calling, I guess. Because of that, I believe that it's our job, so to speak, to initiate that. Because both sides are fighting against each other. One side is like, well, I'm not going to do this because the other side is doing this. And the other side is like, I'm not going to do this because the other side is doing this. But we're never going to be on the same page if we're not willing to try to make it work. And because I do believe that men are called to be leaders, I do think that we should initiate from our end the healing process, or that the healing process. And what I mean by that is by working together with women. So by being intentional. So these things that we spoke about, if it resonates with you, the healthy masculinity aspects that we both brought up, if it resonates with you, I do believe that's a great place to start by drawing inspiration from those characteristics and applying those characteristics. Will there be pushback? Definitely. Will there be people who try to put it down or maybe shame it? Definitely. But the more men who speak up, the more men who are proactive, the more men who wants to lead by example like Christ did, I do believe that on the opposite end, women would be more willing to join that, more willing to cooperate. So I do believe that intentionality and cooperation is key. Those are some actions that we can take. What that looks like on a day-to-day, like I said, is practicing those qualities. And just more men doing this. And it does require speaking up. It does require being strong and courageous. As God says 365 times in the Bible, if not more. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. We as men should be courageous. Speak up. Rise up to how God defined men should be. It's a journey. It's a process. It's not black and white, and it's not an overnight thing. But those are just my thoughts. Those are just my opinions of how we as men can take actions. On a day-to-day, it can look like so many different things, but I do believe that practicing those qualities is the right step. And honestly, let's just be real. The more, you don't even have to be Christian or believe in Christ to see how Christ was, like the characters that he displayed. And I feel like even without stepping into, the word Christianity, if more men practiced what the example that Jesus provided, which, there won't be that many women, if any at all, that would not want to cooperate. That's just my opinion, though, but I would like to hear your thoughts.
So do you think if more men actually practice Christianity?
I'll say if more men practice intentionality and cooperation, some of these characteristics that we mentioned, like being kind, being loving, being faithful, seeking out justice, speaking up and speaking out, being bold and courageous, and the other aspects that we spoke about as well, stepping into a leadership role, which is servanthood. I feel like if more men practice that, there will be more grounds for cooperation on both the genders. The reason why I wouldn't necessarily say practicing Christianity is because some people, it's not even for the sake of the people, it's just that some people hear that and they turn everything off. And it's just, what I'm trying to say is, by practicing these things, we build a healthier ecosystem and environment for everyone, which by default is practicing Christianity. Whether you like it or not, it is. But that's just my take.
Okay. I like, that's a good point. I think ultimately it starts with us as men, right? Like, what can we do? Like, I think we could all think about people. We can say this person's fault. But ultimately it starts off with us, and what can we do as men to change things to the right direction, move things to the right direction, right? We see a lot of the issues that are happening, right? And it ultimately starts off with the family unit, right? And I think a lot of it starts off with things that, what can we do, right? We see even like today, there's a lot of more men. I think there's a statistic actually, I think I don't know if it's I'm sure it's in Canada too, but I know for sure in the US, but there's a statistic that less men are getting married, or by choice deciding to not get married. Some of it's by choice, some of it's not by choice.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, but it's like more men are not getting married, right? But now, how does that affect the family unit? Right? Are there going to be less families, right? Because less people are getting married, And I think that it doesn't help where people's beauty standards are far higher or inflated as they were versus when they were years ago.
Yeah.
Like I'll say specifically with, I mean, men too, specifically like with the woman's side, right? It's a lot higher than it was years ago with our parents' time, right? Given the fact with social media and everything, right, which makes it hard, right? But ultimately, just going back with the guys, right? What can we do to basically alleviate this? Now, I believe personally, ultimately starts off with family, right? Having families, right, and helping the next generation to creating just helping build the next generation of young men in society, right? To grow up in stable households, stable families, family units, and ultimately starts with ourselves. So the work that we're doing on ourselves to help our families, our future generations.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, that's a great point. That's a great point because at the end of the day, it really does start from the family because as you raise children, they go out into the world. So yeah, no, I definitely agree with that.
For sure.
And I guess my final note on everything, my final pin is, though I do believe that men should take initiative, recognize boundaries as well. Like, it doesn't mean like to the point where you're damaging yourself or being taken advantage of. And there's no, in my opinion, there's no point of pointing fingers at each other. Like, let's all do a better job of cooperation. Men have unrealistic expectations of women. Women have unrealistic expectations of men. I blame social media, celebrities, or I guess the not celebrities specifically, but like the industry, and even like artificial intelligence, low key. But that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, so yeah, if you guys have any comments or questions, do drop them down below, or send us an email if you do see where our email is. Like we mentioned, there's so many different things we can talk about that we might have brushed over or skipped over. So if you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear it. We would love to hear y'all's thoughts. So please join us in this community. And yeah, best want to send us off?
Yeah, of course. Thank you all again for just taking the time to just listen and just join the conversation. And obviously, I'd love to hear from all of you. What do you think? What do you think is masculinity versus toxic masculinity? I'd love to hear your comments. As Jeremiah said, feel free, drop your comments below. And again, thank you all for just joining us today. See you guys next time. I'm Best.
And I'm Jeremiah.
I'll see you guys next time.
Take care.
Peace.